Okay, today I got a great treat for you guys. I sat down with a legend in my field, someone who I've looked up to, someone who's a colleague of mine, a really good friend. Dovid Kohn, or David Kohn, he's known in the field. This is a therapist. He's been a therapist since the beginning of when I was working, 25, 26 years ago. He's done amazing work with addiction and mindfulness, and right now he's the clinical director of Ray of Hope. He's been the clinical director of SAFE. He's done incredible work and has an amazing private practice, but on top of all that, he has tremendous insights. I thoroughly enjoyed speaking to him. He really just has a grasp of so many topics and a phenomenal therapist. So I hope you enjoy. Remember to like, follow, subscribe, put comments, do all that good stuff. It helps the podcast. And I hope you enjoy.
Hello and welcome to the Brainstorm podcast. And now, your host, Sonny Perlman.
We're live.
Hey, Sonny.
Hey, David. Okay, so I know you as David, but professionally I call you David. I don't know if I'm supposed to do that.
I go by both. Really.
Okay.
Yeah.
We go back so long. I'm really, really, really excited that you're here.
Go back long.
Took a while to get you over here.
It has, but I'm excited to be here. It's good to see you.
As I was telling you before, one of my favorite types of people to talk to are the old timers that started out with me about the same time.
I am whiter than you, so
I stay youthful. It's gonna get white as Sphero beard gets worse and worse. You have a much better Sphero beard than me.
My beard used to be, in my real youthful days, it was orange. I had an orange beard, and so lighter here turns white faster.
Oh well, my hair's pretty light. Oh, we'll get there. We'll get there.
Due time.
We'll get there. I'm going a little bald. Just on top.
I wouldn't, you got nothing on me.
That's true. You're winning in that section. When did you start? Actually, I remember you starting like almost exactly the same time as me. That's why
I got married in 1999, and I was already applying to graduate school at that time. And then I started working at OHEL right at the same time. So like 1999 is when I began formally in the field. Yeah.
You're old. That's when I started. I mean, little before.
I got married right at the end of 99. Like in December, Y2K was predicted. And literally at the wedding, like people thought like in a week or two, everything's coming to an end.
It was wild. Remember that? It was
wild. People were like convinced that everything is coming to a total end and nothing happened. It was just the biggest anticlimactic event that I remember in my life.
I want to tell you that at the time, I actually was like kind of like hoping it would happen. I was curious.
You're bored?
Like, the Great Reset. Let's see what happens. It's not like I had money or anything. Like, oh no, my bank account.
That's why I remember just like no one knew.
It was very weird. And then it just didn't happen.
Nothing happened.
Yes, I remember that. I think I was at when that year, I don't know if it was Y2K, I was at like a fish show at the, no, it was 99. In 99, I was on New Year's Eve, I was at.
So the year before.
So it was the year before, so it wasn't that. No, I got married in 99 also. But I started in OL before, I'm like 98, maybe something. Anyway, we're going back a long way.
Yeah, so you predated me at OHEL, and then that was where that was my first formal job in the field.
It's wild because when we were back then, there were so few places.
It was unbelievable.
As you're saying, OL, our place, you had
Mask,
Jewish board, Mask, and Yad Scan Center open. That was later.
It was a little bit after.
Little bit after.
Yeah.
Now we got like crazy amounts. So okay, here's the first question. What do you think has changed over all these years? Like, what is like the most drastic change?
I mean,
in the
first thought that comes to mind is that in the frum world, it became completely not just fashionable, but even like desirable to go into mental health, and not just women, but men. Like there was such a dearth of males in the field. And so like we were weirdos, we were the exceptions.
Right.
And then I remember like child therapists that are men, like from male child therapists, they're like impossible to find. And now like so many people are going into graduate school. I guess the FROM programs have a lot to do with that, but I don't know if it's only that. Like it's just times have changed. And so that's like the first thing that comes into my mind is
Do you
there's
think
so
that's
many
changing
people.
in the actual, like in the wider secular world, or it's specific to the firm
No,
community?
specifically in the, I meant it specifically in the FROM.
Because it is,
community.
because a guy said to me recently, I couldn't believe this, because someone said, oh yeah, there's an issue with more women in the field, and the guy who just got a social work degree went through school, one of these Jewish programs, and he's like, really?
Right. So I think
He didn't even know it.
I think the proportions are completely different.
When we
So I
were
know-
in school, we were the only man in the class.
I applied to Hunter. I was
Right.
dying to get into Hunter because there was
Cheap.
barely any tuition, and it was a good school. It was known to be a good school, and I was already working at OHEL, and I got in. Why did I get in? They had group interviews. It was me and 6 women. I was the only guy. I walked in, and I was like, I think I'm going to get in. Like, I'm going to stand out. I'm just going to represent myself here. And I got in, and they refused to let me keep my job at OHEL and go to graduate school. And I had just gotten married, and I wasn't walking away from a paying job in the field to intern for 2 years. So I said no, and I didn't go to Hunter. I wound up going to NYU
Oh, wow.
and paid student loans for a whole bunch of years.
Still paying.
Yeah.
Really?
I'm already in the field long enough that
You're
that's
long enough.
that's long done with. But
Oh, isn't that fun when you pay off your student
oh
loans?
my gosh,
That was fun.
me and my wife together, we were both doing graduate school, got married, did graduate school, and spent years paying off student loans.
She did graduate school also after
She
marriage?
was doing a master's in speech at Brooklyn College. Yeah, she's a speech language pathologist.
So my wife did the exact same thing. So we had, my wife did the speech, then she switched to special ed.
Oh,
Now
does
she has a
special ed.
business.
Just moved out.
She's
of the
just like left it all. Now she's got a business.
I remember a good friend of mine we were chavrusas, we were good friends. We started together at OHEL, and he had also gotten a master's, not in social work, but in psychology, I think. And then he turned to me one day after like a year or two. He's like, I'm going to work. And he just walked away from the field happily. He's a businessman, very happy, successful, just walked away from it, didn't look back, So people make career changes. When I went to NYU, actually, I did the 3-year program instead of 2 years. So I was one of the youngest people in the program. It was for people coming in second career. So the average student in my program was like twice my age, and they were wise, experienced people. It was nice. I enjoyed it.
That's awesome.
And they were all just pivoting a little bit in their careers, So,
Oh, yeah. You remember that guy, JJ? I had him on the podcast. Anyway, he became a social worker, he went into real estate, then came back.
Oh,
I've never
interesting.
seen that before.
Interesting.
JJ Reader, yeah. Shout out JJ. But that I never see. But I actually, one of the things that fascinates me the most is how the names have changed. Meaning, like, I guess it's a lot has to do with like in the addiction world. Like you seem to figure out a way to be in all the worlds.
The worlds
Okay.
that I want to be in.
We'll get that. The worlds that you want to be in. But I basically got kind of pigeonholed mainly in the addiction world. And in that world, almost everybody leaves. That's what my experience is.
I
Like
mean-
all the programs. How many programs have you seen open
Come
and
and go.
close?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like all day. Everybody's got a great idea. They open a program. It doesn't happen.
It's hard.
It's very hard to keep it going. And like it's fascinating to me when I meet people that are still in it.
Mhm.
That is something that always makes me really fascinated. But actually, when you got into the addiction world, was there a reason you got it? You just got
That's a great
thrown in.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I knew from 11th grade, I had made my decision. I'm going to become a therapist and I'm going to work with children. That was my clarity that I came to in 11th grade.
Wow,
Yeah, a little nerdy.
it was a
Little
lot
freaky.
nerdy.
More than a little nerdy. And yeah, whole story with that. I thought my dad would be crushed because he was self-employed. He was in the diamond industry, and he used to say, like, I'm the oldest in my family. You'll come when if you'll work in the business. And I thought like he would feel like he put this all for nothing. And I remember talking to a Rebbe of mine that I was close with in 11th grade, and he's like, no, just talk to him. And so one Friday night, we're walking to a relative, just me and him, and I share the big news. And he's like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy you're not going into my field. It's so messed up. And you're going to be such a good therapist. I felt like such a fool that I was under such stress for so long. But so I knew in 11th grade, this is what I wanted to do. And I did start working with kids in the field when I started privately. In my private work that I started, I worked with kids. Eventually, I phased out of that because I was also doing addiction work. And it was like a little nuts seeing people with addictions, adults, and then working with like 3, 4, 5, 9-year-olds, play therapy and stuff. And I just felt like I had to make a decision which direction I was going. But it happened because I worked at OHEL. I was a case manager with the chronically mentally ill division. They have a couple of programs. And it was great because I never would have chosen to work with that particular population. It wasn't where my interest was, but there was nothing available with kids in OHEL at the time. So I just had to start there. That was like my foot in the door. And it was an amazing clinical experience just to be able to have that. So I was, in hindsight, I was very grateful for that. And then I heard my friend who left the field told me there's this guy working at OHEL who's an addiction specialist. You know who I'm talking about.
Okay.
And
Is that the guy who said I disagree with everything?
yeah, that's the one. And
Can't say names,
and
folks.
he's a legend, and he's an old timer, and I'm dying to work with him. And I was like, I got to work with him. And so I started basically shadowing him. As I was doing my regular job, I would take additional hours for free and just spend time with him, and eventually earned myself a job with him and switched over into. So he was an addiction specialist.
Right.
But if he wouldn't have been, I was chasing him. I wasn't chasing addictions per se. I wanted to
He's a fascinating guy.
you know, he studied with some of the pioneers in family therapy, like legends in the field, Carl Whitaker. So I was like, I got to get shemushed by this guy, you know, and learn from him. So that's how I got into it, really. That's how it started.
Oh, I feel like you're saying such nice things, but you're not saying his name because I said I disagree with everything.
Yeah.
I was just a dumb whippersnapper. He was probably right about everything.
Maybe,
was
maybe
Kiwi
not.
there when you started, by the way?
No, not right away. I don't remember when he
Did
came.
he ever come in?
Yeah, so, sure. Kiwi.
He worked with you.
Yeah. So Sani, your brother, Kiwi Perlman, legend in the field.
That's
and,
right.
Dovid guy, and someone I consider a friend as well. So Kiwi came in, and I think it was initially an internship. I'm not 100% certain if I'm remembering
was?
that. Yeah, it was. And so, yeah, he interned with us in the addiction program at OHEL. And he still talks about it. Probably did more than a little therapy around some of those experiences as well. It was intense sometimes working there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how I first met Kiwi. Was at
You
that
guys
time at
started.
OHEL.
Also, I think Barry was with you guys at that point.
So Barry Horowitz was there.
you got some superstars.
Yeah, it was like a corner of the floor at OHEL that had a few different programs, and it was great. Like we grew up together. That's what it felt like. We grew up in the field together.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
So I was like on the outskirts of that, but
Not totally.
not totally. I feel
Yeah.
like I was tapped in
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
So you end up. So now you're stuck with the addiction world,
Not stuck. Yeah,
and you're
I
still
like it.
doing addiction work.
Not exclusively.
No.
Not exclusively. I work with, in my private practice, I work with couples. I work with addiction-related couples work and just general couples work. With individuals who come, I work with a lot of people that come with addiction-related stuff. Substance, not as much in private practice, as much as more the behavioral process addiction stuff. And also with people that come and they've been to therapy over the years, but they have deeper core trauma-related developmental trauma stuff, and they're coming to do some deeper work. I
Right.
get a lot of people that will come that way and have groups privately as well. We should talk about that because that's an important piece
With the
to fill
groups.
in.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things that I have such a hard time with, and that's why I stopped prior. One of the reasons I stopped prior practice myself. There's a lot of reasons. I don't like to collect money. It's just a couple different reasons. But one of the things is that there's a limit to how many people you could actually help.
Yeah.
That was one of the reasons that it's always like, that's one of my biggest frustrations. I find a good therapist. You have about a year
And then
before
that's it.
you're done.
Yeah.
And then you can't get in there.
Right.
So I think the group work deals with that on some level.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's so hard. You know how many times people have called, like, could you just call Dovid and say, like, Just say, please stick them in somewhere.
Yeah. It's like you say, when you're booked, you're booked. There's only X amount of hours
There's
in
only
a
a
day.
certain amount of hours that you could do.
Yeah, that is a limitation.
All right, but let me ask you, like, globally, like, you're watching the Jewish community, 25, 26 years of this. Like, okay, I'll ask the question a different way. Hold on. I've asked the question this way. It's like, I'm going to ask it in the Jewish community, but in general, in the community, we get more therapists. We have more modalities. We have just awesome things going on.
We say we within the frum world, you
In
mean,
the frum
specific?
world and the secular world, but I'm
Okay.
going to say for the frum world. And either we're just more aware of the sickness that's going on, or it's like an epidemic that seems to be growing at a pace that we literally, sometimes I feel like I'm throwing throwing rocks at the wind to try to like stop the wind, or like that's how it feels. Like I'm it almost feels like, and this is a frustration I have, it's like almost feels like either we have the wrong answer or we're not hitting it enough, or maybe just the numbers grew and now we're just like, we're
Do you
seeing
mean
the numbers.
specifically addiction?
So no,
or
I'm saying with
broad?
everything. I don't think there's a family out there that's not like struggling on some level. I don't remember that when I was growing up.
Right.
And I mean, I was the only one struggling. Like there wasn't even like a Waterbury for me. There was nothing. It was just, there were a couple of us. There weren't that many. Neve existed. Like the question is really like what is happening that people seem to be struggling more and more, and is therapy addressing it? Are we doing enough? Like there's a lot to this question, but that's kind of what I would love to unpack.
That is a heck of a question. It really is. Yeah, that's there's a lot in that. So who knows? I don't know. But some thoughts that I have.
Yeah, no, let's hear your thoughts.
Part of me really believes that I think this is something like Rough Cook would say, and the way he would view it is that it's a beautiful thing that people's pneumius, people's internals, can't be tolerated. We can't tolerate the suppression and the avoidance and the disconnect that human generations used to be like, more like. And so it's breaking through. It's literally just breaking through. Not from anybody's intention or agenda, but just because the human condition is evolving generationally in that way. And I think someone like Rough Cook, and I feel it too, I think there's truth to it, would say this is a Mashiach thing. Like we get closer to a time when we're supposed to be somehow merging and be more integrated in our psyche and in our emotional self, and be a much more embodied and relational being. And so a lot of breaking open has to happen for that. And I think we're seeing that. So I think that's true. I resonate to that. And the internet and technology and everything that does, I don't think human beings were fundamentally built to know all the horribleness that the average human being, the average kid is exposed to. Just world news, just what's going on minute to minute and everywhere and every way. Like, so it takes a tremendous toll on the psyche. I don't think it's natural, but it's what it is. It's the reality. So I think that's also a big thing. And in general, we're just more stressed as human beings than ever before.
Why do you think we're more stressed?
Well, I mean, I don't know how much of this would be specifically within the frum world versus the general world, but in the frum world, there's the pressures to earn, and how many families, how many moms are homemakers proportionally compared to families where mom and dad are both working and making even good money and still barely keeping it together, right? Like that's just normal in our world.
It's interesting. I would say like there's a little historical piece that like I find that everybody's like trying to make America great again. Not necessarily going for Trump, but like kind of that idea that like
the good old days.
There was good old days. I had an uncle, Uncle Dave, who was awesome. My favorite out of all that generation. And you'll understand from the story, kind of. He was like the guy who's like 80 years old and like the dancer in the like when he got
Right in the middle.
down. Anyway, Uncle Dave was amazing. And I was sitting around, it was like some shiva and someone died. And it was a bunch of like miserable old people. Like all my uncles. Like, I don't even know who they are, but they're like the great uncles. And they're all sitting around. I would say, and they were like reminiscing about the old days, kind of. And then I turned to Uncle Dave and I say, Dave, good old days, huh? And he looked at me. He said, good old days, rotten old days. We were starving. We didn't have any food. We didn't know where the next meal was coming from. Electricity was getting turned off. We were moving from place to place. These are the good days. We're living the good days now. So I'm not saying that's exactly the truth.
I think
but
that's
I do
also,
think there's a misnomer that there, like, I feel like from 1950 to 1960, there was a time period where the men worked and had a car and a house, and the women, and then like by the time it hit the 60s, it was over. Like that's what I feel. Like
right. Well, there was also a serious drug problem among many female homemakers back in those days too.
Right.
Like there was
they're all on amphetamines. They're out of control, losing weight like crazy. No, so I almost feel like there's only a short period of time we idealize that time, and everything before that was like rough. Like people, the women worked because you would sew up socks at night to like make some money.
For sure. I didn't mean it in like a sense that like the world used to be better in that way, but there was a presumption built into the kishkas of the average human being that life is just full of heartbreak and challenge and poverty and struggle in a way that like we're not conditioned for that now. My kids don't, and I'm not bemoaning it. I'm not complaining about it. I feel blessed that I'm able to raise my kids without them in any way having to, and I don't just mean my kids. I'm just saying the average kid is growing up completely sheltered from that kind of mindset, that life is full of struggle and difficulty one way or another. And then we encounter life, and people are not prepared for it constitutionally in that same way. So I don't mean to say that like they were better, but the stressors and stress is an interesting thing because it's like trauma. Understanding trauma accurately is not based on the story that happened. It's based on my relationship to the story that happened, how I internalized. What is the story about my experience? That's where trauma is. It doesn't lie in the actual experience as much as in the meaning that I gave it, consciously or not consciously, around that. And that's what results in the traumatic impact of something. So I think stress is similar in that way. Like,
I totally understand what you're saying, but I'm going to ask you to give like an example of that, just because it's a deep concept, and if that's all right.
Like a regular life example, or
like what does it mean that trauma is the story we tell? Like,
sure.
I love what you're saying, but I want you to, if you can, like give kind of an example.
So
of that.
this mentor of mine that we were talking about before,
Yeah.
once shared a story with me. It's the first thing that popped into my head. That, you know, he said, when I was a kid once, I don't remember the exact details. I think it was something like a teacher drove me home from school one day and then, you know, tried to molest me. And I remember running home and telling my mom or dad, and literally not thinking two things about it for years, until some years later I saw some sort of news story on TV, he said, and it was a similar kind of story. And I'm like, oh, that's what my teacher tried to do to me, you know, X amount of years ago. I didn't realize that that's what that was. And it was just some interesting, quirky, you know, story that didn't impact him in that way. And yet, you and I both know well that a situation like that could and does deeply impact many people in very harmful ways. We could talk a lot about, you know, sexual abuse and the impact of sexual abuse, but it wasn't as much the story of what had happened in that situation as how he did or didn't put meaning to it for himself. And there's all sorts of variables that might go into that in terms of protective factors and family and, you know, age and all sorts of factors that might go into that. But what we see from these types of any type of story like that is that two people can go through. I mean, in psychology, there are the classic twin studies where you have twins that grow up literally in the same home, and one grows up with resilience and the other one doesn't. And so there's the psychology of resilience, and kids, some people are just more constitutionally capable of withstanding difficulty in different ways than others. But aside from the resiliency factor, you can have two people go through the same thing but not have the same story about it after that.
Right.
And so the traumatic impact will vary based on that as well. The meaning that, you give to that. What does this reflect about me? What did this do to me? So those are narratives that we have in our own mind about these things. It's not just based
Right.
on.
It's so true what you're saying. It's interesting that you ever watch this movie Mumford?
No.
Oh my gosh, it's one of the greatest therapy movies. It's a therapy movie, but I have to say it that way. You have to watch it. I'm not going to ruin it because it's a very off. I think everybody should watch Mumford.
Okay.
So Mumford, it's not so appropriate for every
disclaimer.
Not appropriate for all audiences. Rated R. But in the movie, the therapist, this guy's holding a secret just forever. Like, he's holding on to the secret, and he just feels so much shame about it. And he tells the therapist, and the therapist says, as secrets go, it's not a great one. He's like, I got way worse things. He says, matter of fact, it sounds like a pretty good idea. Like, he just took this story and he just made it.
He just neutralized.
He just neutralized the entire story. It's like, oh, yeah. But this guy had built an entire story and had built a whole identity based on that story. And this is a trauma. And he just said, oh no, that's not at all bad.
And he was ready for that at that time. Right. He was ready for that intervention. I don't know if the therapist meant it, intentionally as an intervention or not. Irvin Yalom, legend in the field, psychiatrist, therapist, written, classic books in the field. So he has a great story like this too. He says that in his older age, he developed a fear of public speaking. And he was a public speaker.
He was young.
So he did something very not typical because he was psychoanalytically trained, and he had a PhD in philosophy, and he totally not cognitive behaviorally oriented as a clinician. He went to see a CBT therapist to cure him with the thing, and he said the guy sucked. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't do a good job, but he cured me. So he says, what did he do? So he says, I was in the hotel and I was going to speak the next morning. So I had booked a session at the hotel to try to prepare myself, and it was just a stupid session. I don't remember a thing that happened, but at the end of the session, the therapist said, oh, and by the way, I hope you remember to pack your gun. Gun? Like, what do you do? Like, yeah, some dude from California. He didn't have a gun. He's like, what do you mean? He said, well, if you try everything that we talked about and it doesn't work, you can always just blow your brains out. And it created this shift internally for him about realizing how tightly he was holding on to this. And it just loosened something for him. And he said it was resolved. He just didn't have the fear of public speaking after that.
That's amazing.
So
that's a very Viktor Frankl type of move.
Right.
Like, why don't you kill yourself? I have done that. So why don't you kill yourself? No, I have a story where when I was a kid, there was a guy there who inspired me to get off of drugs and all that stuff. And I told him later, you inspired me to get off of drugs and all the stuff I was doing. He was like an older guy. He was in his 40s when I was 18. Mm-hmm. He was the older guy we hung out with. And he said, oh, I'm so happy I did that for you. And I said, because you
told him this years later.
And I knew it because he was a real inspiration. I said, you were living my horror story. If I looked at you, you had kids, you had a wife, and you're sitting there doing drugs with us. And I was like, your wife doesn't know what's going on. You're cheating on her. You're doing all this stuff. I'm watching all this stuff happen. I'm like, if I continue down this path, there's you. And even
he was your negative role model.
He was my negative role model. I just looked at him. I was like, this is exactly. he had like the same color hair as me. He had like long, like the long beard, and I was like,
And you told him this after.
I totally told him, and he like didn't know because he thought I was saying it
Right.
like a
You inspired
compliment.
him or
Nah, at
something?
that point, he had gotten sober, like fixed his life up a bit, but I can't let you that story, but like it was similar. Like he thought he like did a great
Right.
intervention, but it was
Right.
kind of almost accidental.
Right.
That's such a great line. He's a terrible therapist, but he cured me.
Yeah, he has the story in one of his books. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great story.
I find some of the things in therapy just floors me. Like I give an example. I was dealing with a guy for a year and a half, and all we talked about was like his low self-image and like his self-esteem, and we just wouldn't stop. This is all we're talking about. A year and a half in, at least, he comes into the session and he's like, somewhere in the session, he has like this aha moment, this like brilliant like breakthrough, and he says, "You know what my issue is? I have a low sense of self-worth." Like, I feel like we should have been dealing with this. Like,
Don't you love when that happens?
it was like,
We should have been talking about this.
and
like,
I was like, what the heck just happened? I now I'm like older or wiser, I don't get the same shocks as that. But I always find, and this is because the Olive story is bringing it up with me, is like, you don't know the thing that turns on the person to make the change.
right.
And to understand.
And
it.
also, that you can have two people having a conversation and two completely realities are happening at that time, which is also a Yalom story. Like his first book is the story where he saw a college girl and she couldn't afford to pay for 4 or 5 times a week therapy, which is what the norm was back then. So he said, "I'll make a deal with you. You write up the notes after each session. I'll write up notes and we'll give it to my secretary." And then eventually he made a book. And you start reading this therapy, his version, her version, it's like they were in 2 different rooms having 2 different meetings. And as the therapy progresses, it starts becoming more cohesive and coming together. But yeah, I've had that experience too, where like a client will say something like, "We talked about that for 470 times, at least maybe 470,000 times we've talked about that."
And they just, right.
But
So
people internalize and hear what they hear when they're ready. And
okay, so what you're saying, I'm doing a throwback on what you're saying with kind of the times would kind of explain this explosion of addictions that are going on. Is that, well, one of the things you were mentioning is that we are not in a time period, like we're sheltered in a way that we're not in a time period where pain and stressors are anything we expect. Like we didn't grow up in 1920, in 1932 when the Depression was happening, and they were like, "Of course, life is miserable," and like,
yeah, how could we? I mean, you press a button and like, I mean, the technology and the comforts that we have and the conveniences, it's just, and how fast it moves and develops. We were just schmoozing before about, AI. So how can people at the same time grow up and we can intellectually know, we die, we get sick, that bad things happen. We know that, but like, people are just not knowing that experientially, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. I'm just saying, like, we're not conditioned.
well, maybe it is a bad thing if people are like developing addictions based on this.
I mean, I don't see it as good or not bad or not bad, because like it's just the reality of the time. It's just a reflection of the world we live in. It's like
you can't do anything about it.
right. It's just a reflection of this particular era of humanity. So I think that along with great enlightenment, which I think would be a fair way of describing how our times are unfolding, there's also greater vulnerability. I don't see it as, I see it as a flip side of the same coin.
Do you think, by the way, I'm freaking loving the positive view you take, and I'm like trying to bring you to a deep, dark, sad place, and you're like,
I'll try
I
hard.
love this. Anyway, no, I'm not trying to bring you to any place, but do you think, kind of based on this, that we could hit levels of enlightenment that people who are in a more struggling time couldn't hit?
Yeah.
Because we have the ability to work. I was thinking that like the lowest level, the Maslow scale is like the pyramid is got like we have it all that stuff.
Yeah, I think even I say this by first saying I am by no means an authority on this topic at all. I would not call myself a Talmid Chacham, a learned person. But even if we talk about Torah study, I think that we're in the beginning of a time that what Torah study means and what it's going to look like is going to drastically change and evolve, and pretty rapidly, because of AI. You know, the hurrying over learning, the hegisabo, you know, the killing yourself to remember information and retain information. It's not going to be that way. It's going to change. Not good, bad, right? I don't know, but it's changing. Though, look at education. Look at how
Right.
teachers are starting to use AI. You know, in the schools that are more progressive. So instead of trying to hold back and say you can't use it and you're cheating if you do it, because they're just not with the program. You know, they're not equipped to deal with reality. Schools that are more progressively oriented with their education approach are embracing it and integrating it, and it's rapidly changing teaching and the classroom and what teaching means and what do you need to give to kids, because what you used to need to give to kids you don't need to give. Technology will give it now.
Right.
So it's just happening so fast.
It's happening fast. I think even the progressive people aren't catching up to it. Like,
No, it's happening faster than anyone can catch up to it. It's unbelievable.
I find it every generation, the Jewish community hits like this new level of technology and they fight it off. Like now it's happening like monthly. It's like
You mean the reactivity to the
no, it's just that like when we're like I'm assuming when the telephone came out, I love it. I actually read an article about when the telephone came out and people went crazy
bemoaning
in the Jewish
the evil-
community.
the
Like
evilness
they're
of
going to be able to immediately talk to
Right.
the other person, not going to understand the
Right.
idea.
When I was a kid, it was all about television. I passed the telephone era, but the rabbis would bemoan the evils of television, and those same
the
rabbis,
toilet bowl.
those same rabbis would probably nostalgically yearn for that television programming to be back, compared to what kids potentially are exposed to today and have access to today. It's like 20 oceans apart from what I was, when we were growing up, what we had.
But it is interesting because my kids went from like the more like yeshivish schools, went to the more mono-Orthodox schools, and it was I don't know if I this is a very small study. Let's put it this way:
Small sample size.
This is very, very
You don't have that
small
many
sample
kids.
size. I only have 4 kids, but when I looked at, for example, cell phones, the community, like the mono-Orthodox community, like they gave cell phones to their kids. They were more ready. Well, in my experience, I'm curious what you think, but like they seem to be like more ready to deal with what to do with the cell phone. Where if you took someone, you held them back for 18, 20 years, and then they get a cell phone, and then it's like all havoc. There's no training on what to do with the cell phone. Is that something you're seeing?
I remember when I was in my earlier years, so I was still working with kids and teenagers, and I would get these kids that come from the more from sheltered communities, Hasidic and non-Hasidic, but the more sheltered, insulated communities, and they would be sharing with me confidentially in therapy that like they've begun to watch movies, they've discovered DVDs, and I felt like it was my duty to share with them and to educate them that there's movies and then there's other type of movies, and you're going to sooner or later encounter those also, and you should know that they're not the same. Not all movies are, because when they didn't know that, and then one movie, well, this is a DVD and that's a DVD, so what's the difference if it's this or porn? Like they don't know the difference between this and that. So then within a very quick amount of time, they're just hooked on the porn. So I think that speaks to this point that you're saying, that like not really knowing, so then there's a not being prepared. And it would be interesting to know if statistically the prevalence rate, the rates of kids, with addiction issues and struggles is significantly different in one community versus another. I suspect it's not significantly different, despite what we're acknowledging as a cultural difference.
Addictions to To me, like, let's say cell phones, we're saying.
In other words, whatever the percentage is, right? In the world of alcohol and drugs, they have research that shows that it's roughly 8 to 10% of the population, right? So if we generalize that, we don't have the same solid research with other behavioral stuff. But let's say we presumed there's some research that it's about the same, 8 to 10%.
Right.
That 8 to 10%, I think, is probably sort of fairly equal across cultures and communities and, faiths and all that. So I think what you're speaking to that is perhaps different is not that 10%, not those outliers, but the broader general population, that kids in more modern kind of environments are going to be exposed because that is fundamentally part of their worldview of modern orthodoxy. That is, that's their lachatchila is you embrace modernity, and that's how they see what being a Jew is supposed to be like. And then there's the hashkafas of the more yeshivish and Hasidish worlds where that is not the perspective. So
it's very interesting because you're really saying something very important, that addiction really is a disorder. Meaning, like, that's what I'm talking about is issues in the community. So you're saying, like, there's an issue in the community. Like, people are like a little out of control because they don't know how to deal with, let's say, cell phones or this influx of stuff. But that's not necessarily gonna make more addicts.
Right. I think also that in the more traditional communities, there's always this initial reactivity to something that's new, and new often feels threatening. And then reality catches up to itself. And then I remember a particular well-known Jewish organization that was very anti-internet and didn't have a website, and they've had a website now for years. Eventually that same organization got a website and became, a presence on the World Wide Web. So it evolves, so there's the initial reactivity, but then it gets integrated one way or another. And then there's the rules and the attempts to curb the tide, but
I do like what's happening. Like, a lot of the programs that are like going to schools and training kids about drugs
technology
and alcohol and technology and stuff, they're not taking the approach of like, this stuff is bad.
Right.
I do really like that.
Yeah.
Because I remember when I started out, they wanted me to speak in schools. I'm sure you spoke in schools as well.
Yeah,
and it was like
the era of the 80s, the scared straight, the drugs, say no to drugs, the cops, DARE, the famous program DARE, that how many millions and millions of dollars the government spent on sponsoring and funding. And then the research comes out and says this is a horrible failure. Like, the effectiveness is abysmal. It's not effective. It's not really, say no to drugs was a failure of a philosophical, sociological approach.
I would say we lost the war on drugs.
So we've caught up. The prevention technology has caught up to that. Realizing that that's not the mahalach. That's not the approach that's very effective.
Right.
We're not scaring kids into becoming healthier versions of themselves.
Okay, so I wanted to talk to you about the specifically the process addictions, because I know you've dealt with this more than most people that I know. So I'm gonna shoot at your direction.
I'll do my best.
But my experience with drug and alcohol addiction is that it's really, really bad, and it's dangerous, and we got to deal with it. But when it's dealt with, and you do you do the 12-step program, you work a good program, you get a sponsor, I've seen people's lives change within a year. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I'm going to throw it your way.
Are you including folks that did not use 12-step approaches for that process?
Yeah, I guess I'm just saying, yeah, I'm not, I was giving a simple example, but yeah, even people, let's say I've had many people who have this is an interesting statistic that most people that get off of drugs do it without any program. Mm-hmm. And I think you know that.
I mean, that's always been the dark secret in the addiction
treatment
world, is that most people age out, they mature out of their drug abuse.
Which is one of my big, huge things, because everybody wants me to send all the kids to rehab. And I'm like, why don't we wait and see until if they aged out, which most people do. But so that is, but even if you're talking about the hardcore addicts that are like older and they really need help, I'm picking one particular methodology, 12 steps, because I think it's the most effective I've seen out of all the other methodologies. Um, it's also the simplest that I've seen. I've seen other ones, but there's too many nuances and too many ways that you could control the program that you don't end up getting it better. Now, I will say in my own programs, Our Village and we're running, we have to work with all of them because some people just don't click with the 12 steps. And so we do have to do that. But for this example, I'm saying there are fairly easy, not easy, but there are fairly simple ways to actually shift your life. And I see people's lives shift. And like, most people I've seen, if they give a good year of like really working on the addiction, like genuinely like putting it out there, listening, it's about a year to change your life. Now, going to the process addictions, I have found with gambling or with sex addiction or food addiction, I don't find this happening. I find people going through many, many years and ups and downs and backs and forths, much more than I see in the substance addiction world. So I have some thoughts, but I really am interested like in what you think. Look, first of all, like why are you seeing that? And what is your like ideas on that?
Right. Yeah. So I have seen that. I think that with substance and drugs, the addiction is seen as the problem. The drug use itself, the alcohol use itself is the problem. And when you solve that problem in whatever way, 12-step or whatever, you've solved the problem. There isn't generally a perspective of like, that's when you beginning to work on the problem now that you're sober.
Okay.
You've solved the problem and you feel better. And especially if you're in a 12-step type of a program or something else that's like community and group based or something that you have a people, you belong, you have an identity. But when it comes to process addictions, the support infrastructure to see it that way is not as established and not as strong. There aren't nearly as many meetings. If we're going to talk about 12-step, for example, there aren't nearly as many meetings. The culture in the meetings is different. The length of sobriety is not as strong. You could walk into a well-established AA meeting and you're going to meet a whole bunch of old-timers who have 40 to 60 years of sobriety. You're going to meet once in a while someone like that in the other programs. I mean, GA may be a little bit more like that, but it's also not as ubiquitous as.
So why? I'm saying that's kind of the question. Why am I not seeing 20, 30-year people in those meetings? Do they stop going to the meetings? Is it not being successful? I'm saying even if it's several meetings, we should have old-timers. Right. It's been around for a bit.
I mean, I do think that generally, I would distinguish between gambling, clinically, maybe when we say process addictions, we might throw them into the same mix, but I would distinguish between gambling versus food and sex addictions.
Okay, I agree.
Because gambling is more akin potentially to, gambling is a hybrid because you can't live without money.
Right.
You can't not have a relationship with money. So if you have a history of compulsive gambling, it's challenging to continue to have a relationship with money, which is non-negotiable. But now your permanent forever relationship with money has to be gambling free. And by the way, it's not just gambling, it's all financial disorders. Like gambling is one of a whole bunch of different financial disorders. Gambling is like the one that people talk about, but people suffer from all sorts of financial disorders: overspending, underspending, people that are wealthy that feel like they're not worth their wealth, so they don't own it in a healthy way for themselves. People that are compulsively giving and not feeling like they could say no. So there's a whole bunch of financial disorders, but similar to food and sex, you can't live without money in your life.
Right. I love that you're saying it's a hybrid because you could live the rest of your life without gambling.
That's right. As a behavior, but...
Right, but you can't live the rest of your life without sex or food.
Right. That's non-negotiable.
You're going to have
sexuality,
to do the
even if you're celibate, your sexuality is active and with you one way or another, as a human being.
Right.
So even if you're not acting on it, it's still very alive and present within you in some way. So, and certainly can't live without food. So those are just built-in challenges on that most basic level.
Right.
To live without alcohol, you can't live with that in a culture that's alcohol-free. We tried that with prohibition and it failed pretty miserably. It gave us, the mafia. But but you could live without alcohol in your life. You'll be exposed to it, but like you can have an alcohol-free life.
So in order to get better from the process of addictions, you have to not only overcome the thing,
but you have to learn
but you
how
have
to
to learn
live with that thing in a whole different
healthy way.
That's like a whole nother level of work.
It's like,
and that
learning
begins
how
with
to-
sobriety. That
Right.
begins once you're sober. You can't do that work while you're still actively struggling with the compulsive behavior. That's work that only begins. So it's like finally having sobriety, finally staying sober long enough that like this is no longer a day-to-day struggle. Like I can predictably imagine that in all likelihood, next month I'll be sober again. Next month, to finally get to that point, which is a big struggle. And now the work begins in now how to have a relationship with my sexuality or my food intake or money. That's complicated. That's hard work.
Yeah.
And that's not really discussed in 12-step recovery. That's not, the 12-step program is not built for what's healthy sex like, what's a healthy relationship with money like. That's not really part of the GA program. Just like there isn't in the AA program, what's a healthy relationship with alcohol like, just
You don't know.
alcohol's the problem.
Abstinence.
And so the focus on it and the work that you're going to do on it, if you're lucky, you know that you need to do that work and you have someone helping you do that work with you.
It's interesting because I think when I think about the 12-step program and the power of the 12-step program, I don't think it has anything to do with getting rid of the addiction. I think it has all to do with self-development. And
Yes.
it's just self-development.
The spiritual program.
Right.
Sure.
It's a spiritual program, and we're developing. And first, we're understanding that we are loved, and there's a possibility to be loved. Then we do all this work, and then we give back. So it's like this 3-step, 12-step program.
Right.
I think even though that's true, so people have asked me, and this one I could get into big trouble for.
Let's hear it.
The big trouble for. I'm gonna get into big trouble for this. I get the question. Okay, let's say I get totally sober. I'm living 10 years sober. I don't want to drink. Right? So this is the question. First of all, every addict asks this question because they can't imagine not living it. But we all have people in our lives that we know that did exactly this.
Sure.
They did the 12-step program, or they did another program. They got totally sober. They got their family together. They got this. And then they start drinking again, or even smoking pot on the weekends, and it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like we all know people
Sure.
like this, but we have to push it on the rug. Like that's not possible. The answer the 12-step program gives to that is then they weren't really addicts the whole time. Because a real addict, if you touch it again, you're back in party time.
Yeah, the 12-step program in the big book would say, you're not that third category of the hardcore alcoholic.
Right.
They identify the 3 types of people that might have a problem with alcohol. And the third one is the one that's like, hopeless without the program. So yeah, they would say they're not in that category.
Right. So that's their answer. But either way, like a guy asked me, and I say, this is where I get into trouble, is that technically, if you are recovered, right? That's the idea of the 12 steps. So we say 12, recovering, but the book doesn't say recovering. It says recovered.
Who have recovered. Yeah.
Right. So it's you are recovered, meaning you're developed to a point that you don't have a problem with alcohol anymore. Mm-hmm. That is what it means that you're healthy, not that you stayed away from alcohol long enough that it didn't make you have the problem again. Mm-hmm. Now, I tell people pretty much no, and the reason is because that at some point in your life was the answer to all your problems. Mm-hmm. So even though maybe when you start drinking and you do it for 4 or 5 years and it's going good, you may hit a real difficult patch of your life where you're not working on yourself and you're going in a bad place. And then you remember, oh, this was my answer.
And more like just play it safe.
Yeah. So to me,
just take a safe approach.
The answer is play it safe.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I usually say.
Mm-hmm.
But in my belief system, a person who is fully developed should be able to, similar to a process addiction, learn how to deal with alcohol in a healthy way.
Right. In my office, when clients ask me that, they're never asking it after being sober 10 years or 5 years or 15 years. They're asking it now without being sober or just in the early stages, and they're thinking ahead, and they're, like you said before, they can't imagine living the whole life without it. And my answer then is, why don't we cross that bridge when we get there? And I mean it. I'm not trying to push them off or play. I really do mean that. Let's
Right.
cross that bridge when we get there. I don't have a problem with the idea that maybe when we're facing that bridge, you could drink. That doesn't, I don't feel the need to believe that might not be a possibility. Like you said, we all know people where that could happen, but I'm not a prophet and we're not there. So what are we really talking about? We're talking about your fear. We're talking about, your difficulty right now, wrapping your head around this. Like I try to bring them back to the reality of what they're struggling with in this, because they're asking something that isn't really about today. And say, are you clear for today that you can't drink? I was just working with someone, up until this week, that's coming to terms with the fact that due to some vulnerabilities that he unexpectedly bumped into within himself, he can't drink for now. It would really, or drug, it'll really mess him up in a significant, likely way. And it's not worth the risk. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he has to believe he can never. It might,
Right.
but
Yeah, it's a totally
keep
different
open to it.
conversation. Where I get stuck and where I get in trouble is when people 10 years later come to me
Are
and
coming
say,
to you.
listen,
I'd like
I'm
that.
living a life. I have kids. I have this and this, and now I'm still drinking grape juice on Shabbos.
What am I doing?
I did all the stuff. Like, it's a different conversation.
Yes, it is.
right?
That is a different conversation.
Right. And I do something pretty similar to you. I say, like, why don't you come? Right now, you need to get everything together. When you get everything together, let's, we'll circle around.
Yeah.
to
Also,
this
sometimes I'll have this. I haven't had it so much like in the scenario where someone's sober 10 years and now wants to drink, but I've had people who have had problems with gambling, but not necessarily compulsive gamblers, but they've definitely had some compulsive gambling episodes, binges, periods of time. And it's not so clear to me or to them that they really need to see themselves as just black and white. I got a gambling. And now they say, I'm going on vacation. I want to, just for fun. That's not about the action. I just want to, can I do it? And I'll say to them, if you're going to do it, ultimately a therapist's job is not to tell someone what to do or not do. But if you're going to do it, I can help you come up with a really good plan of what doing it in a healthy way would look like. And so how much money are you going to spend, decide beforehand. Don't have more money or access to money on you. Have somebody with you. That person should know your plan. Bookend it before and after. Like there's all sorts of very practical things that a person can do. And the same thing goes with drinking, that if they make a plan and it's implemented in a real effective way and they really are faithful to it, the question is just whether they'll stick to that plan, not whether the plan could work. The question is whether they'll work the plan.
Right.
So I've done that. I've had those conversations.
I think it's also, it's funny because that question is like, this just comes to my head with kids, like when you say, okay, it's time for bed, you're tired, and then they start crying like, I'm not tired, and then you're like, see, look how tired you are. So I see that with addiction, like you're like, can I drink? You asked me that question 10 times this week. Like, it seems you can't drink.
Right. That is
like,
a classic thing that therapists will do, and it is sometimes true. Sometimes it reflects.
It is
like,
sometimes true.
But sometimes it's just a mistake in critical thinking. It's not, we have the narrative already to try to prove to that, point out to them that this is like a self-fulfilling, a proof of but it may not be.
I also have another struggle with addiction counseling because that's, like I'm so focused on addictions counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Even the name is funny to me because I'm a social worker. So I'm not trained to tell anybody to do anything.
But you were never a KSAC?
I was a KSAC.
So then you were both. You were a social worker and an addiction.
Yeah. So I'm both. But the idea is that my job is to get you to do something that you didn't even tell me you want to do yet. It's a weird thing as a therapist. Not like, what other thing would you do in therapy? You're like, oh, that's bad. You got to stop doing that.
I mean, to me, that dilemma is only, that's not good therapy. Having a goal for someone that they don't yet have for themselves.
That's what I'm
saying. But
it's
a dilemma only when we work in the context of addiction programs, of formal programs where there's a legal mandate. So we both probably dealt with that reality. But I don't see it as a therapist dilemma. Like, in other words, I can still hold on to the knowledge that what I'm doing is bad therapy, but I'm working in a program and I have to, in order to work within this program, I have limitations. But this isn't good therapy. It's not a contradiction.
Right.
It's a limitation. That is a challenge. Yeah.
Well, okay. So I jump another thing. I was sitting with Faith Nice. Did you see that podcast? I did one with Faith.
A little bit. A few minutes of it I saw.
She's fantastic.
She is.
Anyway, she's doing great work. And I asked her, like, and she said something that was so new that I'm curious what you think about it. I said, I don't understand. I see the most shame in particularly food and sex addictions. I see more shame than I've seen in any other addictions. And to me, those are the ones that seem they shouldn't have any shame.
Like it's so natural. Like
Yeah,
at
like-
first we're going to struggle with
Yeah. I mean, there's food. It's good. It's delicious. I eat too much of it. Now it's a problem. You know, it's like, it's so obvious. I don't have to go do drugs. It's not natural. Like, why is that less shameful? And same thing with that. And she said that she believes, I don't know if I want to talk about evolution on Jewish's podcast.
It's your podcast.
It's my podcast. But she's saying as we coming up, living in these small communities, hunter gatherers kind of, there were two things that determine our survival, and that is if there's enough food and resources, and if we're breeding, if we're able to have more children. And basically, she's saying that at the time, any type of variations, you're a danger to the community. You're not allowed to do that. So it's like she's saying it predates religion even. Like we're always like, it's about religion and stuff. She's saying that like, it's disgusting to us it's built in disgust to be messing around with any of those two things. And that causes so much shame. What do you think about that?
I hear it.
It's an interesting thought, huh?
I do. As a therapist, I tend to focus in on the theories that are more directly relevant that I could do something about. Like, that is a nice theory, but like, what can I actually do with it? I mean, potentially you can use it in the sense of educating that to a client and hopefully normalizing some of that, and maybe that'll work. But generally, top down, like giving someone an idea and somehow that's going to resolve shame doesn't usually work very well. Like the resolution of shame has to come more from within the experience than just like ideas and theories. So I think it's true. You can have somebody who has a non-shame-based relationship with food or sex, and then someone else who does, and we could look at factors of how what was the messaging that they received, consciously or not consciously, intentionally or unintentionally, what was their exposure. Like there are environmental systemic factors that we can understand why something can. I was just sitting with someone who came into, I used to work with him, and he came in to consult about a child. And he was expressing how he doesn't want his kid to go through the suffering that he went through. I said, well, your dad wasn't sitting in therapy expressing that concern like you are now as a dad. So your kid's not growing up in the reality that you grew up. Like I have to point that out to him. But it was very obvious to me that, of course, this kid's not going to struggle in the same. He might struggle. He's already having a struggle. He's not going to struggle like you struggle because you're sitting here struggling over your kid's struggle.
Right.
When you were growing up, nobody was doing that for you, you know?
So it's different.
So I think that there are
it's
many.
Not better.
Right. That's what I'm saying. I think
different.
that there are differences that can account for why some people will just have a lot more shame internalized than others.
So how would we work on shame? Like, how do we do that?
So I actually do think that when it comes to food and sex, I don't work with as often as much as the sex and sexual related behaviors. Shame is one of the core issues to work with in the therapy and the treatment. I know how you talk about how addiction is really an issue of lack of community or lack of connection.
Right.
So in a similar way, I think that when we struggle with shame, it's reflective of a lack of a healthy relationship with ourselves and with others. So not so much about the aspect of community and connection, that's a related idea, but the idea of being relational with self and being in healthy relation with others. So I think that a lot of my time in therapy is talking about that, understanding that, and working on that, the relationship we have with ourselves and the way that we have a relationship with others. And I think that that is how shame gets neutralized. When you're in a different way of being in relation, I'm working with someone a long time, and this person recently said to me, you know, when I go through struggle now, somebody upset this person, spoke really disrespectfully and in a demeaning way to this person. And then the client shared with me, I have a voice inside me that says, I love you. Like, You got this. You'll be okay. And like, that was obviously not something that ever used to be the inner dialogue. Then the old reaction that used to be there of course, you're right. And this is a reflection of me, and getting down on myself and being all critical towards self. That was the norm in the past. But with this way of now having a different posture of being relational with self, it's the antidote to shame. So I think that that's a big deal. Isolation and connection is also important. You know, if
Right.
somebody's very isolated, they need to be in
Well, shame
positive
causes
connection.
isolation, even
Right.
if you're in a room, no?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because so okay, I'm trying to see if I understand exactly what you're saying, just because it's a
I
little,
use the metaphor.
Yeah.
Imagine that you have your own child, and your own child is in pain, and you've done everything practical that you can do for the situation. And at the end of the day, even though you've done whatever you can do, there's still sadness or hurt or pain that your child has. What are you going to give to your kid? You know, I've asked this a million times to clients. What are you going to give to your kid? And sooner or later, people will say things like, well, I'll come over, I'll give them a hug, I'll sit next to them, I'll put my arm around them, I'll tell them, you know, it'll be okay, or I love you, I'm here for you. I'm like, right. And do we do that with ourselves? Do we have an inner posture of seeing ourselves in that way? Seeing when we're in struggle, when we're in pain, when we have a setback, and being able to have that be real internally within us. But we need to. We all need that. So I think that when that's strengthened, when that's cultivated, when that's grown, and the good news is that it can be, there are ways to do that, then shame shrinks.
right.
And obviously the isolation and the secrecy part is a huge piece as well. You know, people that are walking around feeling like they're carrying heavy, horrible, dirty secrets are going to feel dirty as a result of that. And if they have an opportunity to not feel that way, whether it's through therapy or recovery community or groups or whatever it'll be, loving, non-judging people who they can safely share with, that will also, you know, secrets grow in the dark. And
Right. Okay, so here's an interesting thing that I give this really cool Thursday night class to just like the inner circles. I get
cool.
to say all these, it's not recorded, so I get to have fun.
Nice.
And come up with new crazy ideas and tell them some of my old crazy ideas. Not all the ideas come out on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things is it's a little bit of a theme, because a lot of people that I've found, they're saying all I need to do is self-love. And I agree. That's all we need to do. But what I've experienced is that if I don't learn how to be loved from an outside source and internalize that somehow, I will never know how to use that tool. So it's like a cup filling itself up. So I'm saying, like, that is a struggle. Like, when people say, like, what is the answer to all of it, is self-love. Like, that to me, like, if you skipped all the process, you could just go right there. What I found, that's why I'm always fighting for this community piece, is that the community is telling someone who feels completely unlovable that you are loved, and then and eventually, after a year and a half, they go, oh, I am loved. You know, like, it pops in. At some point, you start believing it. And it could be happen in therapy, and it could happen in other ways. I just find that it doesn't happen naturally if it didn't happen.
You can't
already.
give yourself what you weren't given. If you
Right.
don't have it, right? If I don't have gas in my gas tank, I just don't have gas. How am I supposed to now fill it?
Right.
I hear that, but I don't know why we would need to distill all this down to one thing above all else. I don't know that I would say, like, self-love is ultimate. I would put that as one of the fundamentals, but I would put healthy connection and a support system, just as fundamental as self-love.
I would say it's fundamental, but if there was a way to do self-love without that, which it isn't, but if there was, then you probably wouldn't need it. That's what I'm trying to say. Meaning the goal of all that community is that we then internalize that love and learn how to have a self-esteem and move forward in our life.
On a basic level,
That's just to me, that's the mechanics, how self-love
I once heard
happens.
I once heard a very famous American meditation teacher in a question and answer session claim that he could live alone for the rest of his life, happily and healthily. I don't buy it.
Well,
I
that's
just
been
don't buy it.
disproven many, many times.
So,
Although
I
there
think he
are
believes it, what
some
he's saying.
people that have been hermits, and have done things like that, but it is the absolute exception. Meaning the worst torture you could possibly do to somebody, even if they're healthy
Isolation
people,
or
is
seclusion.
isolation.
Yeah.
I'm not saying. I mean, like, don't think I'm not talking about that. That is essential. I'm just saying is like people say like all I need is self-love. I don't think they're wrong.
Right.
I just don't think it's possible.
I'll tell you what I do, where my slant is on this clinically as a therapist, because I hear the dilemma and I agree. It is a dilemma, especially when you're working with people who have significant developmental trauma and they just were neglected, that they didn't have those love experiences. And unfortunately, that's not unusual. We can work with people that really have significant deficits in that way, deprivations. I don't emphasize the self-love. I emphasize presence, mindfulness, to develop a way of being present with self. So when I talk about relational with self, and I talk about, for example, coming up to the kid, I'm not using words like you love your kid, you give your kid love. That's not the language I'm using because it's not how I'm looking at it. Yes, it is love. But the love is coming from you're just committed to being present for your kid. You're going to practically do whatever you could do. And when you can't do anything practical, you're still going to be there. So it's a committed way of being with yourself. And I think that love can be cultivated through that, can emerge from that over time. Like when my client said to me, hey, I have this inner voice that says, hey, I love you. You got that was years and years of hard work that eventually, so I think it could happen. I think it could be cultivated, but my emphasis is not, I'm not sitting with the dilemma of how do I get you to love yourself? It's how do I get you to show up in a present way without the judgments, without the stories, realizing that you're just in yesterday or tomorrow and you're not really, what if you're able to just show up now and we strip away all that, like what's left? What's left is a lot of love-like stuff. All that negative stuff is when we're not really being present with ourselves in that way. So that's clinically where I go with it more. And that's a reflection.
Talk more about the mindfulness. I know you're crazy
Right.
about
So
mindfulness. No, tell you what is mindfulness? I do a lot of tangents. That's how my brain works. I'm excited that you brought up mindfulness because that was definitely it's on my list of things to.
So mindfulness is a clunky word because it's a translation of a word in another language that somebody said is mindfulness and then it caught on and it stuck. But really a more accurate word, a more accurate translation would probably be like awarefulness, like embodied awarefulness, which is even clunkier. Imagine if that's what we had to say instead of mindfulness. But really it's a more accurate description.
What's the original word?
Sati, S-A-T-I. That's one word in Pali, in the ancient Buddhist language.
Right.
There's a couple of other words like that, but
it basically means present, like present
in an embodied way,
right?
Non-judgmentally, using your capacity for awareness. So you and I are having a conversation right now, and most of the time, we're either very engrossed in the conversation or we're preoccupied to some degree, more or less, with other stuff at the same time. But how much of that time that we're having the conversation are we having the conscious awareness? I'm sitting right now. I feel the chair. I see you. I know I'm seeing you. I know I'm speaking as we're also having the conversation. That's mindfulness. It's the being in the moment with whatever you're doing with the simultaneous awareness of that.
Right.
So you're the participant of your moment and the observer simultaneously. And we have the capacity as human beings to do that, and we have the capacity to cultivate that and to strengthen that. We don't think cows can do that. We don't think dogs have the capacity to do that. But humans can do that. We have that capacity of being aware as we're also with the experience itself that we're doing. And when we do that from a clinical perspective, we could talk about this in many ways, but from a therapy perspective, when we do that, there's no place for anxiety in that. There's no place for depression in that. There's no place for self-loathing or self-criticism because that's in yesterday-oriented thinking. It's in rumination about the past, or it's in fear-based thinking about the future. But in the present, there isn't anxiety and depression. It's when we are floating backwards or forwards in our thinking, which of course we do.
Right.
And we need to. We have to have our orientation of our mind be able to go into remembering yesterday and planning for the future. But we also want to cultivate within the capacity that we have inherently, everyone has inherently within them, to strengthen the ability to just abide more consciously, to be more consciously within the present moment. So that practice, there are many ways of practicing that, formally, informally, is something very meaningful to me personally, and also informs my work professionally. So even if I'm not talking with the client about mindfulness, I'm not always talking about it all day. Its philosophy, its fundamental ideas are informing how I understand what they're suffering from and how to help them with it.
Right. And this happens to be I don't share about it enough, but it's very meaningful to me. Like, one of my goals is to get Michael Singer on this. I don't know. If you're
Untethered
familiar.
Soul. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Untethered Soul. Although I like his other book way better.
Right. The more recent
Surrender
book.
Experiment. Whew, that one because it's a story of him. I love things in the stories. It means a lot to me, but let me ask you a question. Is a lot of this acceptance? Is the word acceptance a big part of this?
Yes. So there's a
That's
whole
what I
form of
found
therapy
with,
where they take that, they run with it. Stephen Hayes, ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy,
right,
where he takes that idea and really utilizes that. So how do you mean it in the clinical sense?
right. That's what I'm saying. How do you take? I mean, I know that when I meditate, which I'm very grateful for any time I get to meditate, which is less and less. Sometimes I go through phases. Usually the better weather. I like to sit outside, so the better weather makes
More conducive.
Also, I meditate in my pool. That's like what we call, the guys called T4, that I'm showing off that I have a pool. But I do live in Muncie and have a pool. So I sit, there's a place in my pool I can just sit and meditate. And in water meditation is the highest. But what I get from my meditation the most, and I've never done meditation in therapy or anything, I'm saying as a client myself, but when I learned about meditation, I think the thing that shocked me the most about meditation was how unboring it was. I mean, like, I thought, oh my God, I'm bored to death. In the beginning I was, and then I realized then the thoughts start coming, the feelings start coming, the physical sensations start coming at like enormous rates. Everything's trying to distract me from the present. Right?
I don't know who initially says this. I know that it has also its roots in Buddhist psychology, that what is boring? What is boredom? It's not really a thing. It's a non-thing. Boredom is simply the absence of interest. So instead of saying I am uninterested now, we say, oh, I'm so bored. So we make it into a thing, like but it's the absence of a thing. It's lack of interest is where boredom manifests. But you became interested as you started meditating. You suddenly found yourself interested. Like, let me observe my thoughts and my feelings. Right. So how can you be bored when you're interested? There's no place for boredom then.
Ooh, I like that a lot. So lack of interest. I never seen that actually. It resonates very strongly.
Yeah, it resonates for me too.
Yeah. But when the meditation that I do, the main one, I've done some other ones, but the main one is allowing all that to happen and not doing anything, not
observing.
Kicking it out.
Just observing.
I'm not even observing. So that's the difference. I see it because it's there, but the practice that I'm using is that it doesn't matter. You're there or not there. Take your choice. Have a good day. Come, go. You stay as long as you want. You're like a welcome guest in a house that I'm not paying attention to. There's nothing to do with it. I see you, but you're not part of it. That's the way. And what ends up happening is everything just goes because it tries to like distract me, and then it tries, and then it just goes away.
You're familiar with the poem from Rumi, The Guest House?
I think I am, but can you say it?
Yeah, I don't remember the whole thing by heart, but like the whole idea, he talks about, this being is a guest house. This life is like living in a guest house. Every joy, a depression, a meanness comes as a momentary awareness, as an unexpected visitor. And he says, welcome and entertain them all, even if it's a crowd of sorrows that come and violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. still greeted at the door laughing and invited. And so you have that posture. That's what you're describing. It's
Right,
like,
that's
whatever's showing up, I'm just, hey,
You show
come on
up.
in. Right.
What I find at some point is that I call it whiteouts because I'm not well read enough because I never read this particular meditation. This is my main meditation. But what ends up happening is that I go to a place where there's nothing and there's everything. It's not, my wife calls it the soul, but I don't know what to call it. But it's in the place of the observer. It's nowhere else. And nothing's coming. And I have these moments, and sometimes even longer. Like some of them have go for 20 minutes, like really intense
During that
moments.
time, if somebody was calling you, would you hear them? Would you?
It went in the whiteouts, very hard. I have one experience. I think I shared it on the pod once. Where I had an experience where I had meditated for like 3 hours or something in such a deep way that I completely left existence, I think. And then my dog was sitting next to me, and at some point, my dog got up and started tapping me. I don't know how long she was tapping me.
Eventually, you
And I eventually came back, and then I cried for an hour. It felt like I was just born into a world that I can't handle. I don't know what to do with, and I cried. That was the most intense it ever.
I've had experiences like this.
Yeah,
many times.
Oh my God!
So it's when the mind becomes really concentrated, which only happens when we become really relaxed. Relaxation, being physically and mentally relaxed, is a necessary prerequisite for the mind to become concentrated. When we're stressed and we're efforting, the mind is stressed. It can't relax into this. But when we're really able to relax, the mind can over time become really... The reason is because the natural state of the mind is to be unified. The mind is not really naturally in a fragmented state. But we identify the mind as being naturally fragmented because that's what we're so familiar with. That's what we know. But like, look at little babies. They're completely focused. And everything is just about whatever's present for them in that moment. And then as we get older, we lose that capacity because we're not cultivating it still in that way. So it's like a muscle that's still there, but it's like it's flabby. It's not being worked out. When you start working out that muscle in the way that you're describing, you get to experience it again. And it's powerful.
It's very powerful. What I was saying is that what it's done for me therapeutically is that if in my mind nothing matters ultimately, like it's just coming and going, it's this guest house, then as I'm walking through the day, this is what you're describing.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it from a personal place, I think. But during the day, all of a sudden something comes, I'm like, that is so important. And if I don't deal with it right now, like the world ends. And then I think back to my meditation, like
you're just noticing it instead
at
of
all
reacting, right?
Maybe I have to do something about it.
Well, Viktor Frankl, there's this quote that in the mindfulness world they always, repeat, that between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space lies our freedom to choose. So really, it's about finding a way to be in that space and to stay in that space or to return back to that space. Stimulus is whatever's happening, and then my reaction. But I don't have to automatically have stimulus and reaction. I could have response by inhabiting that space.
Right. I used to call it when I haven't read anything before, like in the beginning, when I was like 19 working with kids, I started calling that the pause button.
Right.
And as you get healthier, the pause button gets a little longer in your mind.
Right. You can sustain it. Yeah.
And then it's like we could have attitude, because I had this Rabbi Price, and he said like attitude is only thing we can control in the entire world. There's nothing else. Everything else is out of our control. Like we have attitude, and then when we decide how to deal, then we could move forward.
It's funny, there are some researchers in the world of mindfulness who broke down, like, if you distill it down, what are the fundamental ingredients of it? So attention, intention, and attitude.
Attention, intention, and attitude.
So you have to have an intention of what you're looking to do. You can't just fall into mindfulness without any purposefulness and just find yourself becoming mindful. There's an intention that's connected to it. You're trying to do something without trying.
I think that's what I'm missing.
The intention.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's to calm down. I don't know.
Yeah. Sure.
I never have intention, though. I never have intention. I don't know why. Okay.
Well, but when you discover your moment there that's so meaningful to you, and then later in the day, you're thinking to yourself, hey, I'm remembering what I went through before at the pool. And like, I don't have to be so reactive. Like, I don't need to sweat this. You sound like that's an important intention for you, is to be less reactive in that way and like have more space for yourself inside. So intention and attention and attitude. You also reminded me, there's in acceptance and commitment therapy, they have this metaphor that they use where you've got a car and you're trying to drive somewhere. Let's say you're driving to Florida. It's a whole journey. And then suddenly you're forced to stop because there's some people on the side and they come on and the person's name is anxiety. And you're like, I don't want to deal with anxiety. I'm trying to get to Florida. And so you have a choice now. You could wrestle with anxiety so anxiety doesn't get in the car with you. Or you could say, you know what? I'm driving a van. I have empty seats. Get in and you can come with me to Florida. And then you keep on driving and then depression is there, or fear or anger or whatever. And the metaphor is that's the acceptance idea, is like you encounter these things and then you can wrestle with them, or you could do something else that doesn't involve that type of reactivity. Right. And that we might be better off with doing that instead.
I will tell you that I see maybe one of the bigger problems of today is this toxic positivity. That I see so many people, like we have a Wednesday night meeting where all the guys share, and it's like a really special meeting. But a lot of the guys will share, like, I had all these negative thoughts and I just couldn't get them out. And it reminds me of a line from Nietzsche, like that we're all staring into the abyss. What's the line? Like where man is just like staring into the abyss, and then the abyss stares back into them. That's the line. I don't remember exactly how it goes, but man stares into the abyss. So like it's these scary monsters. Like we've encountered them. And then I once heard Jordan Peterson respond to that. Did you hear this? You're like smiling, but Jordan Peterson said, because Nietzsche was like such an existentialist, he's such a depressive guy, although I love him. But anyway, so someone addressed that idea, like, what do you think about that idea to Jordan Peterson? And Jordan Peterson said, keep staring. Like, that's the point. It's not like, oh, if I stare into you, it's going to get me. Now I got to run away.
That's a line from a famous Rumi poem that Leonard Cohen has a song based on that idea. Like the don't turn away from the crack. That's where the light enters you.
Okay. Yeah.
Same
idea. No, but I find like people, like the bad comes and then that's when you say, oh, I better move. It's interesting because today I did an IV treatment. And I realized how not often I did it because someone gave it to me for free because I talked about it on my Instagram. But I'm saying it's awesome. Hydrant. Right? There you go. Shout out Hydrant. Nice. But I realized that I have such an aversion to even taking a Tylenol, to taking anything. I really like, my wife and kids think I'm absolutely out of my mind, but I'm like, I think our practice in this world is to walk through the pain without it having to run. Now, if it becomes unbearable and I can't work, I'll do it. But I think the point is that, like we're taking them onto the van and they'll get off or don't get off, or new guys will buy it. Not everybody gets on the van is a bad guy also. That's a good point. What I'm saying is, like, I am so averse to any type of putting anything into me because I think my mission is to feel the pain. I don't know if that's, and this is why I like Nietzsche.
Maybe. This is maybe as you continue to get older, you'll soften it just a little bit on.
You think I'll soften it
as you're starting to creak a little bit at the hinges? Like maybe I don't need to be in pain all the time. I hope that never happens.
Yeah. It could also be like men having aversion to doctors and medicine and stuff. Right. I just saw this reel that said that married men live longer, but the reason is so stupid you're not going to imagine it. The reason is that married men don't like making doctor's appointments. Married men's wives make it for them, and they go to the doctor more often, so they actually catch the problems.
That's wild. You'd never guess that.
It's so dumb you wouldn't guess it.
That's funny.
You think like, oh, it's happiness and stuff like that.
That's really
All
fun.
right. So how did you get involved with Ray of Hope? And tell us what Ray of Hope is.
So Ray of Hope
It's
is
not
a-
Ray of Hope advertisement. I'm just curious about it.
Sure. So Ray of Hope is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to supporting survivors of sexual abuse, men and women in the Jewish community. And it's not providing treatment. And it's based on the philosophy, on the idea, but on the understanding that it's bad enough when somebody's gone through the trauma of sex abuse, whether it's childhood based or adult, whatever sexual abuse they've gone through, and the traumas and the impact is bad enough. But the shame and the stigma and the isolation that they often, almost always, or in one way or another, have to experience is like a whole nother level of trauma that we can do something directly about. So I can't rewind the tape for someone and press the rewind and now they never had that initial trauma, but they don't have to continue to live in that sense of disconnection and isolation and loneliness and feel like a second-class citizen. I have heard survivors, members say to me, more than one, well, I wish I just had cancer because then I'd have High Lifeline, or I wish I had something hard. That's so painful to hear that. So Ray of Hope exists for that reason. And it was started by a wonderful woman, Zeldy Brody, who didn't set out to start an organization, but just recognized and intuitively realized that let's just bring people together who are survivors. And it turned into a group. And at this point, we have between 20 to 30, I don't remember the exact number, support groups, virtually and in person, all over.
Are they being run by professionals or some
so
of them
we pay professionals, we pay therapists to facilitate, but it's not a therapy group. So we pay them to bring their skills to ensure that the support group is safe and constructive and supportive, but that's it. It's really a support group. It's not about the therapy. There's no therapy. People are expected to be doing their own therapy separately and independently from, doing the groups. And we also have Shabbatones and member newsletter and ways to connect through WhatsApp and social get-togethers, all sorts of different ways of supporting people and connecting people with each other as a way of combating that secondary traumatic reality that really people don't have to suffer from. We could do something about that. So it's an amazing organization.
Wow.
And I got involved a couple of years ago. Zeldy was introduced to me by another colleague, I think Dr. Chaim Neuhoff. Thank you, Chaim.
Nice.
I think suggested that she meet with me.
And
it came at a time in my
life. I
life.
used to share an office with him.
Did you? Where?
Yeah.
In Brooklyn?
31st Street.
Cool.
Yeah. All right, sorry.
Out of his home office?
Yeah.
Cool.
I rented an office.
So he introduced her to me, and it came at a time that I was looking to start getting involved. I didn't want to leave my practice. I still have a practice, but I wanted to start getting involved again in a broader way. I had come out of safe and organizational work years ago. And for a whole bunch of years, I had just gone back into solo practice, had some associates and then back into solo and then some associates again, but like really just working mostly in that way. And I felt like it's time to start getting involved in a bigger way. And she came along and I felt the mission is amazing. And we're growing and, unfortunately, but fortunately, we're here to meet the needs that are huge and significant in the Jewish community. So we're specifically here to support male survivors, female survivors, and their spouses. We have spouses groups as well.
This is wild. And it just grows like the more money you get, the more you grow, kind of.
I don't know. I don't remember what the number is now, something like 40 calls a week or so. I don't remember the number right now, but people, not only support groups. That's like how it got started. Some people call and they want to be part of Ray of Hope, but they don't want to be in a support group or they're not ready yet.
Is there like a hotline?
So we don't have a hotline, but we are talking about a support line. And that's not something that we have now, but we are talking about that. But it's more about like finding ways, not so much about like crisis and counseling, because that's not what the mission is, but finding opportunities to connect people with each other and experience care and support. So like we sent out a beautiful care package before Pesach to all the members. We customized a speaker, a cute little speaker, and with an SD card that was preloaded with meditations that our facilitators recorded for the members.
So cool.
So cute, so adorable and meaningful.
That's really awesome. Wait, let me ask you a question before you go further into Ray of Hope. Because that's one of my things that is always fascinating to me. Because I go into private practice, I start feeling really lonely.
Yeah, yeah.
How
call
has it been
like,
to come
at
out?
the end of the day, I'm emerging from my bat cave. That's what it feels like.
The
I'm coming
bat
out of the bat
cave.
cave. You know, I'm just
Is it
there for
nice to
hours.
work to like be back out there?
I love it.
kinda?
I love it, and I love my practice. I'm not burnt out from it. I want to. I'm invested in growing it, but like being part of a team and helping to grow a team and bringing amazing people that I consider dear friends and I respect, and I think they do amazing work. And then to see how it's directly impacting people, changing their lives just by having them feel cared about and connected, it's priceless. So I'm very grateful to be part
So
of it.
are you seeing it like, it sounds like an awesome idea. It probably is awesome. Are you seeing like people really emerging from that shame and
They're
like,
saying it.
yeah, I'm
The
saying
emails come in, the calls come in. You know, at the Shabbaton, somebody will approach me and say, I just did 10 years of therapy in one night. You know, like heard more than one person say something like that. We had a Shabbaton this past year, over 150 women, all survivors of sexual abuse, coming together, spending a Shabbos together.
wow. What was that like?
It was, I thought the electricity in the hotel would blow from the intensity, the tears, the laughter, the dancing, the pain, all mixed somehow together in one way that just made sense in that context. So intense, so meaningful.
Were
Very
there,
special.
husbands came and stuff, or was it just the women?
Nope, just the women. A couple of women brought some babies. We had some babysitting.
Did women have fun without men? This is the thing. Sorry. It sounds amazing, actually.
It was very special. And we have programs for men as well, and working on a Shabbaton in the future for them as well. So the organization started with supporting women, but
Right,
as
it
it
start.
grew,
I
it did
actually, when
start
you're
with women.
saying men and women, I actually
Yeah. So as
actually
I came
now
along,
have like 50 customers for you because I much more work with the men.
and we ask for a fairly nominal payment to help support, to offset the cost, because we are paying the facilitators to be there for the groups. But otherwise, everything is free. You know, and Zeldy does the fundraising, and anybody that wants to help support Ray of Hope, we would appreciate it.
There you go. No, put a link in the description,
Thank you.
and there'll be zillions of dollars coming
Thank you.
in.
Thank you.
You're not gonna know it. I will tell you that is in all the work I do, that is the heaviest work. Like that is
So heavy.
the absolute heaviest work, and it's kind of amazing that you guys are. I think that's in our village. We say we kind of have two villages. There's the staff village and the guys and the girls, you know. But like the staff has to have their own village in order to keep that village.
Sure.
So I like that you're like in
That is a big part of my own role at Ray of Hope, is to not just find the professionals to join the team, but also support them ongoingly. So they're all doing their own thing. They have their own private practices. They're involved in other agencies or organizations. This isn't their exclusive gig, but it's just one thing among a bunch of other things that they do. But because of the nature of it, it's heavy. And so we have a WhatsApp group together, and we get together twice a year, just the facilitators, and talk and share.
so
it's awesome.
interesting. It's really. So how do people hear about you guys? Like,
So
how did
we do
that-
some, but very minimal advertising. It's really word of mouth more than anything. So therapists will recommend, therapists that heard about Ray of Hope will recommend it to clients. Some rabbis will, but more than anything, it's one friend to another. You know,
and they're
one
all
person,
just telling each other. It's
and word
Go
spreads,
in.
you know. And, you know, if we had the budget, we would spread the word more in a more formal way. The podcasts that Ray of Hope has done, a couple of podcasts, I was on one, Zeldy was on, those, you know, help spread the word. Talking about it with you will help spread the word.
yeah, let's spread the word. I love it. It's so interesting because every once in a while, there's a lot of organizations that don't touch me. I mean, like it doesn't like
Sure.
do anything. Every once in a while, I hit one, and like even like just talking about that Shabbos, like it's really hard. I'm saying it right now. I'm like tearing up. Like it's really hard to not imagine the amount of times people have come to me and shared their experience and say, I've never shared this with anybody.
That's right.
I mean, how many times has that happened to you?
Sure.
It's shocking. It's shocking. And then you have all these people holding each other
It's amazing.
through this and sharing.
And it's amazing. One of the ways that I support the facilitators, one of the most frequent feedback that I'll give them when they'll call about and talk about a certain dynamic and a situation in the group and try to troubleshoot through it, more often than not, I'm sharing with them, like, let the magic happen. Notice it with your eyes. Your clinical eyes are taking in, as a clinician, will notice and understand. But instead of what we normally would do in a group therapy or in an individual session, let the group unfold. And more often than not, the group knows how to just be there and support each other in the ways that are needed, in a way that is much more meaningful and healing than anything I, as a therapist, could have possibly have said or done in my own place. Like that, I don't need to tell you this.
Yeah.
I'm coming from the
No, you
village,
tell other
know,
people, but I
I'm preaching to the
completely-
total choir here.
Oh my gosh, I completely identify the amount. Actually, there's an interesting thing when I'm working with people as I get older, I recognize that I almost never say anything for a couple of minutes. Even if people asking me for advice, because I feel like my participation is minimal. Like, don't just like say, hey, I'm really smart and telling you what I'm doing. And this sounds very obvious, but I'm watching it actually happening. Like, and then something will go, oh, this is where I could contribute. But it's really like, you know what it is? It's kind of, I don't know if you deal with stocks or anything like that. This is something Warren Buffett is like a big guy, but he's like, the teaching of like reason people don't lose a lot of money in the stock. One of the reasons is because they always think they got to be doing something, got to buy something, got to sell something, like
Less is more.
right. So most of the time you don't have to make a move. And I found that like when someone's paying me a lot of money to be in therapy with me, it's like I gotta provide. And usually my providing is it's minimal.
Well, I would say
It's a lot.
I see it a little different.
Right.
You're providing through your presence, and that's what you're providing. So it's nonverbal, but your presence is a very important and valuable thing that you're providing that enables them to then fill that space with their vulnerability. As opposed to like when we're younger, less experienced therapists, we feel like, no, we have to fill the presence with our wisdom and what I'm going to teach them that they didn't know. Like that's what we think when we're younger and less experienced. But you are filling the space in a meaningful
100%.
way.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Okay, asking, I don't know if you ever made it to the end of my podcast. You ever made it to the end of one? Because you have to answer the rooftop.
I don't know if I have.
It's hard. I have a long podcast. The rooftop question
Rooftop question
is, if everybody in the world is listening, like you're on a mic and you're on the roof.
Oh, shouting from the rooftop.
What are you shouting from the rooftop? Like, what is your shout for the rooftop?
Wow.
To
I'm
the
totally
world?
not even prepared because I didn't know you have that. Awesome.
Listen, I don't expect anybody to make it to the end.
Oh, gosh.
If you made it to the end of this podcast, text me or comment orange. Okay, go on. I did
So
that
what's
once
the
before.
one
It was
that-
so much fun.
Did you got response?
Millions of people
That's
said
so
me
cool.
stuff. I was like, last time it was purple.
That's so cute.
I didn't think about it till now. This is like a year and a half ago. Anyway.
That's funny. So what would be the thing I would want to shout to the world? Cultivate presence. Cultivate your presence. It'll change the world. Each person that does that is changing their own world. It'll change the world. I don't know. That might sound so corny.
No, it should be
But-
corny.
You asked.
Could you explain it a little bit more?
I would want to shout some way, I don't know how, to each person in their own way to understand what I'm saying. Like it should make sense. They should be able to relate to it. That not being as present and in relation with ourselves is where our angst and our suffering and our neurosis and our reactivity and our habits and our compulsions are coming from. And it's within you. It just needs to be cultivated. Not something you have to acquire somewhere. You don't have to go to therapy to get it. You just have to cultivate something that we already have as a capacity within us to just be present, be more present. Nobody's ever perfectly present. We're humans, but we can cultivate this just like a muscle that you can exercise and you can strengthen, and it's a game changer.
I like it. No one said that. You want to hear the funniest
Tell me.
rooftop
Yeah.
quote? A.B. Rottenberg was on, and I asked him what his rooftop thing. He says, "I hope there's a net. I'm terrified of heights." I thought that was
funny.
That was straight from Snooki Shapiro.
That's funny.
David, that was awesome.
Sonny, so nice to see you. If a podcast is the reason why I get to spend some time with you, then
This is the longest
podcast
conversation
it'll be.
we've had in years.
Really,
Yeah. I'm telling you. Yeah, people ask me, like, why are you doing this? Like, I'm going to sit down with Dovid and have an actual conversation for a long time. I don't know how long it was.
I don't either.
No idea. Should I check? Looks like an hour and 45 minutes.
amazing,
Crazy.
thoroughly enjoyable, every minute of it.
Enjoyable. Did I forget any
And
topics?
every topic we touched on could have been an hour and 45 minutes by itself.
Yeah, I
Each topic.
know. That's the shame of all this. We're getting a little...
And we worked our way
Rushy
through our
Davis.
tiredness. We made it through. You bulldozed through the tiredness.
Oh my God, I was so tired. It's funny because I took this last thing. I did this IV drip.
So what
today.
you do, an energy thing?
I did an
What's
energy one, right?
How long ago? How many hours?
This morning,
This
right?
morning. Did you feel a
Okay.
difference?
No, he said I'm going to feel it tomorrow morning.
Oh, interesting.
But I will tell you, I didn't sleep at all.
I got to hear
maybe-
tomorrow. How
I
it
slept
goes.
maybe 3 hours
Last night?
So that's what's to blame.
Right,
Probably. I had things going on. So I didn't sleep a lot. But today I was probably the most exhausted I've been in months. So I hope
How long is the
tomorrow-
treatment?
It was like 45 minutes.
You
But
just sit there and you get the drip.
it felt really pleasant.
I got to hear tomorrow if you feel it.
I'll
Let me
fill
know.
you in. I'll text
Yeah,
you.
let me know.
But I will tell you that just the idea, like I kind of got what women feel are going to get like a manicure. Like I was just being like, they were like,
Just being taken
there were
care
like
of.
2 or 3 people like helping out. They came to my house and they're hooking up IVs. And I just felt like I was like being treated very
Pampered.
royally and I was pampered. I was not used to it.
That's cute. But you enjoyed it.
I think I enjoyed it. It's hard to admit, but I enjoyed
nice.
it.
That's nice.
We'll
What do
see.
these things normally go for? What's the
Like $200,
Wow.
$250. It's like,
wow? People
I-
do it like after a night of drugging.
I
and
always think
partying
about it as like instead of therapy.
instead of therapy.
Like I'm not currently seeing a therapist, so I should do something that's $250 for myself this week. I should do
I gotta
something.
spend the money somehow on
It's gotta
stuff.
be spent. I mean,
That's
I gotta do
hilarious.
something. Thank you, brother. Love you.
It's awesome.
Thank you for this day that I've been given. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this chance. Thank you for this chance to live anew.